My very first video came out in April 2019. Since then, I never once made a video about The New Shadow, Tolkien's infamous unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings. Truthfully, I just didn't want to cover the story at a surface level because I feel like that had been done enough, and I kind of thought it was unnecessary because the story itself is like 12 or 13 pages. It's not like it's a tough read. But at the same time, I didn't really want to explore in depth the dark, depressing tone of the story, and honestly, how it serves as a warning to humanity. Today, that changes. Today, let's talk about The New Shadow. As I just said, The New Shadow was Tolkien's unfinished sequel to The Lord of the Rings. It's never dated, but evidence suggests that the first draft was written in the 1950s. However, it was quickly abandoned and did not resurface again until the mid-60s. Sometime in the 60s, Tolkien seems to have made some changes to the story, but did not actually progress it any further. The last bit of information about The New Shadow came in 1972, 15 months before his death. Tolkien explained a little bit more about the timeline and some context surrounding the setting, but that was it. So what happens in the story? Well, our protagonist is Borlas. He is the younger son of Beregond, the guard of the citadel that Pippin befriends during the Lord of the Rings. He lives in a place called Pen Arduin, next to the shores of the Anduin, amidst the hills of Emin Arnon in Ithilien. Given that the story is set 105 years after Sauron's defeat, Borlas is very old by this time, possibly even over the age of 100, but he's still both physically and mentally capable. By his own measure, he probably has a few good years left. He's also one of the few remaining people who remembers the old days, because by this time, even Aragorn, the great King Alessa, has also died. Borlas is troubled. He's had a good life, but the last few years haven't been so kind to him. His wife died about 10 years ago, his unnamed daughter lived in a distant part of the realm with her family, and his son, Baralak, was an officer in the king's ships, lived in Pelargir, and didn't visit very often. It wasn't just the absence of his family that troubled Borlas, it was something else. Something that was stirring within the realm of Gondor. Deep indeed run the roots of evil, and the black sap is strong in them. That tree will never be slain. Let men hew at it as often as they may, it will thrust up shoots again as soon as they turn aside. Not even at the Feast of Felling should the axe be hung up on the wall. These are the words that Borlas says one evening, which catches the attention of a younger man named Ceylon. Ceylon is a friend of Baralak's, and had seemingly lived in or near enough to Pen Arduin as a child, so he's known Borlas for a long time. As an adult, Ceylon often travelled around the realm, with Borlas believing him to be dealing in timber, and when he returned, which was more often than Baralak did, he would bring news to his friend's old father. Ceylon asks Borlas why he is troubled and whether he found this dark tree growing in his own garden. Borlas says no, while looking towards the distant city of Minas Tirith. Ceylon then points out that Borlas is one of those people who has always been an individual of deep concern. He then brings up an old story from the past, when Borlas had caught him stealing unripe apples from his garden. Although Borlas had not punished him, he had labelled the act as orc work, a statement which had left a lingering impression upon Ceylon. It was a mistake, Master Borlas, for I had heard tales of the orcs and their doings, but I had not been interested till then. You turned my mind to them. I grew out of petty thefts. My father was not too easy, but I did not forget the orcs. I began to feel hatred and think of the sweetness of revenge. We played at orcs, I and my friends, and sometimes I thought, shall I gather my band and go and cut down his tree? Then he will think that the orcs have really returned. But that was a long time ago, Ceylon ended with a smile. Borlas then begins to feel uneasy. There's something disquieting in Ceylon's tone, something that makes Borlas wonder whether that resentment is still lingering there, deep down in Ceylon's heart. Now, Borlas doesn't have a reason to distrust Ceylon or dislike him, because Ceylon has been kind to him the last few years, easing his loneliness. Still, he decides he doesn't want to say much more and tries to steer the topic away, instead explaining his old reasoning as to why stealing an unripe apple would be orcs' work. You're not stealing it to eat, you're stealing it to, well, throw away. And by doing this, you're not just wasting the apple, you're robbing the world. Basically, you're destroying something for fun, and not for purpose. In classic Tolkien fashion, this starts a philosophical conversation about trees. Ceylon argues that to trees, all men are orcs. After all, what difference is it to a tree in the way it gets used after it is cut down? Borlas counter-argues that trees were given by Eru for his children to use, and as long as they use it in a good way, without pride and carelessness, and instead with reverence, then it isn't a problem. Orcs, on the other hand, would do harm with delight to all things that could suffer it. That was the difference between orcs and men. He tries to end the conversation, but Ceylon isn't done. "Why," said Ceylon, "we have hardly begun. It was not of your orchard, nor your apples, nor of me, that you were thinking of when you spoke of the re-arising of the dark tree. What you were thinking of, Master Borlas, I can guess none the less. I have eyes and ears and other senses, Master." His voice sank low and could scarcely be heard above the murmur of a sudden chill wind in the leaves as the sun sank behind Mindoluin. "You have heard then the name," with hardly more than breath he formed it, "of Harrimore." This name gets a reaction from Borlas, mostly fear and anger. Ceylon, however, expresses surprise that Borlas has heard of the name. Whoever or whatever this Harrimore is, it represents something bad for Gondor. As Ceylon puts it, they are not many yet to set against all the people of Gondor, but the number is growing. Not all are content since the great king died, and fewer now are afraid. Borlas says he guessed as much, that something like this exists, but he still knows very little about it. So he asks Ceylon, what does this Harrimore want to do? This starts a game of cat and mouse. Ceylon wants to know how Borlas has heard the name, but Borlas wants to know if Ceylon is one of those who has answered Harrimore's call. Ceylon says he will not answer that until Borlas answers the same question, and in the end, both men express dismay that the other is suspicious of them, although Ceylon might be feigning his dismay. In the end, Ceylon does offer something. "I warn you rather to clothe yourself warmly after nightfall, that is, if you wish to learn more, for if you do, you will come with me on a journey tonight. I will meet you at your eastern gate behind your house, or at least I shall pass that way as soon as it is full dark, and you shall come or not as you will. I shall be clad in black, and anyone who goes with me must be clad alike. Farewell now, Master Borlas. Take counsel with yourself while the light lasts." Ceylon leaves Borlas to his thoughts. At first, Borlas thinks of his son, which then causes him to remember where he heard the concept of Harrimore from. It had been in regards to a troubling development down at the Ethir Anduin. A few shipmen had disappeared, as well as a small vessel of the fleet. According to Baralak, the official story is that the sailors went off on their own venture without a skilled pilot, and ended up drowning. But when Borlas spoke to Ceylon about it, Ceylon said that few people were happy with the official tale, because the missing men had been long-time coast dwellers, so skilled sailors, and that there had been no storms recently, so there's no reason why they should have went missing. It was during this conversation that Borlas remembered the other rumours he had heard, from a man named Throndir, describing a canker that was clearly meant to be Harrimore. Coming back to the present, Borlas is left indecisive. He's very much on the fence about Ceylon. He initially thinks that Ceylon must be part of this group. It would explain Ceylon's troubling tone, his avoidance of Borlas's questions, and the black clothes. But at the same time, Borlas reasons, why would Ceylon want to bring Borlas along? He's just a useless old man. Maybe Ceylon isn't part of the group, and maybe he's planning on spying on them, and that the black is either a disguise or for stealth. But once again, why would Ceylon want to bring him along? Wouldn't he just be a liability? He then wanders back to the missing shipmen. Maybe that's what happened to them. Maybe they were invited to some secret meeting and disappeared as well. Maybe Ceylon was extending an invite because Borlas had revealed that he knew too much, was clearly hostile to Harrimore, and therefore it might be safer if he was disappeared. After all, Borlas was very old. It's not like him disappearing would bring a huge amount of attention. In the end, Borlas decides to go. His reasoning, perhaps I have been preserved so long for this purpose, that one should still live hale in mind who remembers what went before the Great Peace. Scent has a long memory. I think I could still smell the old evil and know it for what it is. He also says that even if he loses the throw of the dice, then he won't lose too many years anyway due to his age. His decision having been made, he goes home. There is one final paragraph, and Tolkien left us on a cliffhanger. I'm just going to quote it in full. The door under the porch was open, but the house behind was darkling. There seemed none of the accustomed sounds of the evening, only a soft silence, a dead silence. He entered, wondering a little. He called, but there was no answer. He halted in the narrow passage that ran through the house, and it seemed that he was wrapped in a blackness. Not a glimmer of twilight of the world outside remained there. Suddenly he smelt it, or so it seemed, though it came as if it were from within outwards to the sense. He smelt the old evil, and knew it for what it was. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack with this story. Obviously, something is not going well within Gondor at this time. Firstly, we have this dark tree, this cult, this group of people who aren't happy with the way things are going. In the story, it's referred to as Harrimar, and just from the name alone, we know that it's something bad, because Harrimar was a black Númenórean lord in Harad who served Sauron during the late Second Age, and the name itself is roughly translated as Black Lord in Quenya. So if this Harrimar is a person, they've taken a name which makes them come across as very pro-Sauron. Then we have the missing shipment. By itself, it's not so suspicious. People go missing at sea all the time. Baralak's official story isn't really unbelievable. It only becomes suspicious when Ceylon questions the official story and points out that it seems like a cover-up. So if Baralak's story is false, then what happened to the shipment? And why did the King's Navy decide to make up a different story? Do they even know the truth? And has this been happening across Gondor? Are these men getting disappeared, or are they deserting to go join up with this Harrimar? What about Ceylon? This guy comes across as incredibly suspicious during the story. He guides the conversation towards this dark tree. He's the one who brings up Harrimar. His viewpoints when it comes to orcs, men, and trees are incredibly nihilistic. And of course, the whole end of the story with him offering to take Borlas along to something. While you can't be certain he's part of this dark tree, he certainly knows a lot more than he's letting on. His information about the missing shipment, the fact that he travels a lot, and the fact that the Borlas doesn't even truly know what he does for a living, also suggests that Ceylon might be running in some dodgy circles. And finally, what's up with Borlas's house? He goes home, it's incredibly dark, and he smells the old evil. Now it's described that the scents came from within, so Borlas might not be in imminent danger of being attacked, but still, something is definitely up. I wonder what would have happened next. Was Ceylon waiting for him inside for some reason? Was someone else? Would Borlas have even made it to this secret meeting? The unfortunate reality is that we will never know. There's no more writing in this draft, and nothing else has been uncovered to suggest that Tolkien wrote more. The New Shadow was abandoned, a conception that never really became reality. But fortunately, Tolkien does explain why it was abandoned, and during those explanations we get some more information about the story, where it would have went, and also just how depressing the New Shadow is as an idea. It really does make sense why Tolkien abandoned it. In letter 256, written in May 1964, Tolkien writes this: I did begin a story placed about 100 years after the downfall of Sauron, but it proved both sinister and depressing. Since we are dealing with men, it is inevitable that we should be concerned with the most regrettable feature of their nature, their quick satiety with good, so that the people of Gondor in times of peace, justice, and prosperity would become discontented and restless, while the dynasts descended from Aragorn would become just kings and governors, like Denethor or worse. I found that even so early, there was an outcrop of revolutionary plots about a centre of secret satanistic religion, while Gondorian boys were playing at being orcs and going around doing damage. I could have written a thriller about the plot and its discovery and overthrow, but it would be just that, not worth doing. Now, whether you agree with the assessment of men having quick satiety with good in the real world, it is something that reoccurs through Tolkien's stories. Númenor's whole descent into darkness basically started because they realized they didn't need to be the good guys anymore. They were powerful enough to take what they wanted. Arnor had 800 years of relative peace at the start of the Third Age, and then descended into civil war, serving themselves up on a silver platter for Angmar. Gondor was at the top of the world in the middle of the Third Age, victorious over the Haradrim and Easterlings, and totally untouchable. So what started their downfall? Well, they too started killing each other. Even the Northmen of Rhovanion would constantly fight each other, sometimes even allying with the Easterlings against their own kind, until they were basically forcibly united by Gondor's interests. But there's something that makes it way more depressing after Sauron has been defeated. For thousands of years, the Free Peoples fought against him and his servants, and finally they win. And the end of The Lord of the Rings, bittersweet as it is, gives us the impression that this is the beginning of a new golden age for the Free Peoples. Sure, it's not going to last forever, but you'd think that maybe it would last at least 1,000 years. That at least while the memory of the Third Age is fresh, people will honour the sacrifices of their ancestors. But then the new Shadow comes in and goes, nope, shortly after Aragorn dies, pro-Sauron cultists rise up in Gondor. And sure, even if they're defeated, it leaves a bitter taste in your mouth, because it makes everything seem so pointless. They spent all that blood defeating Sauron, they spent all that time trying to escape his shadow, only for people to immediately embrace it after he's finally gone. As Tolkien said, he could have turned it into a thriller about how the cult and their plot was discovered and overthrown, and I'm sure it would have been a compelling story. But I completely understand why he then says it would not be worth doing, because you're adding an unnecessary epilogue onto a story that had a fine ending, and that epilogue is going to lack all of the magic of the actual story. No elves, no dwarves, no wizards, no hobbits. It's just a commentary on the inevitable restlessness of men, and how easily we can slide towards the darker side of our nature. Despite that letter, Tolkien wasn't actually done with the new Shadow. Perhaps the writing of that letter piqued his own interest, so the very next year, in 1965, he manages to find his own story and make some changes. Some of the changes I have already included, such as what was written about Borlas's wife and daughter. Some of the changes I did not include. In the later version, Bearlak's position in the navy is actually quite high, and Borlas doesn't live alone, he lives with 2 old servants. Tolkien also made a number of changes to names, but that is hardly surprising from him. Perhaps the most important change Tolkien made was a change to the timeline. The original tale is set around 100 years after Sauron's fall, and a few years after Aragorn's death. If you know your timelines, you might go, hold up, this doesn't make sense, because Sauron lived for over 120 years after Sauron's fall. And yes, this is correct, but when The New Shadow was originally written, Tolkien seems to have still been running with the old idea that Aragorn died at a slightly younger age. The change to Aragorn's lifespan already threw the chronology of the story out of whack. So Tolkien updated it, and instead of having the story begin only a few years after Aragorn's death, he decides to set it about 100 years after his death, around the end of Eldarion's reign. He never gives a reason for this, but I suspect it's to add some more gravitas to Aragorn's reign, meaning that no dark cult would dare to rise up while he was still within living memory, and also to have more time between the story and Sauron's fall, so that Sauron's fall was now beyond living memory, meaning that it makes more sense for a pro-Sauron faction to have started rising. The one problem with the timeline change is Borlas himself. In the original story, Borlas is already very old, possibly over the age of 100, but that can be explained away by his Númenórean ancestry. After all, he's the son of Beregond, whose family was from Ithilien. However, if the story is set 200 years after the War of the Ring, there's no real way Borlas can be alive if he's Beregond's son. While his lifespan would have been longer than an average man's, it would not have been over 100 years longer. That would only be reserved for Aragorn, seemingly Eldarion, and perhaps his first few descendants. The New Shadow's revival was short-lived. Although Tolkien made some changes, he did not continue the story beyond the point it originally ended, and to be honest, given the fact that Tolkien was already in his 70s at this point, I doubt he would have been able to finish the story anyway, at least if you consider how long it took him to write his other works. His newfound inspiration seemed to have come crashing down in the exact same manner, in Letter 338, dated to June 1972. I have written nothing beyond the first few years of the Fourth Age, except the beginning of a tale supposed to refer to the end of the reign of Eldarion about 100 years after the death of Aragorn. Then I of course discovered that the King's Peace would contain no tales worth recounting, and these wars would have little interest after the overthrow of Sauron, but that almost certainly a restlessness would appear about then, owing to the, it seems, inevitable boredom of men with the good. There would be secret societies practicing dark cults, and orc cults among adolescents. It's basically just Tolkien describing what the New Shadow would have been, And once again, we see that the same idea is there. Men become bored with good. The people, specifically the young, having no first-hand dealings with the shadow, would start seeing it as an enticing concept. You then get cults forming, small and insignificant to begin with, but they begin spreading like a cancer, an insidious undergrowth through Gondor, ready to erupt at a moment's notice. Once again, it demolishes our notion of the happily ever after the Lord of the Rings gave us. And I think that's an unfortunate reality that humanity has to contend with. Tolkien famously hated allegory. The Lord of the Rings and none of his other works were written with the idea of sending a message. I have no doubt that it's the same with The New Shadow. It's just a story, it's not meant to serve as a warning. But I think it should serve as a warning, because I think there's two main themes that are very apparent in The New Shadow: complacency and forgetting the past. Complacency in the sense that people believed that once evil was vanquished, it would stay that way. And forgetting the past in the sense that once the horrors of Sauron had moved beyond living memory, people started to take an interest in him again, and not in a good way. I'm going to let you draw your own parallels, because the thing is, I don't think this applies to just one event, and how it relates to you might differ depending on where you're from or how old you are. And also, I don't think it just applies to our own time. If you go through human history, there's plenty of horrible things that have happened, and sometimes, not that long afterwards, those same horrible things have happened again. Because our history, just like the history of men in Tolkien's world, is cyclical. But the thing is that it doesn't have to be that way, and the best way to avoid it is to remember and learn from the past. I don't mean to get all philosophical or somber, I'm just a guy who makes Lord of the Rings videos, and you, my awesome viewers, are just here for some escapism into a fantastic fictional world. But sometimes, I think some pretty good lessons can come from fiction. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. Cheers, farewell, and remember, the new shadow is actually when you plant a tree and it grows up.